Everyone in the kingdom believed Lyra Vale was wolfless. That was why they laughed when the Alpha King ordered her to shift. That was why the nobles leaned forward with cruel anticipation. Why the council elders wore thin smiles of certainty. Why the guards at the edge of the great hall tightened their grip on their spears, as if preparing to witness nothing more than a final humiliation. A wolfless girl could not shift. A wolfless servant certainly could not survive the command of a king. And yet the moment Chaol Draven, Alpha King of Blackthorn, spoke that single word into the silence of the court, every torch in the chamber bent inward, as if some hidden wind had inhaled the room. Shift. Lyra felt it in her bones before she understood it in her blood. Her knees nearly gave out, but she forced herself to stand. Chains of moonsteel cut into her wrists. She could taste iron at the back of her throat. The polished black floor beneath her feet reflected her small frame so cruelly that she looked less like a threat than a stain that had somehow wandered into the center of power. Around her, the court watched with bright, hungry eyes. They expected fear. They expected failure. Some of them expected entertainment. Chaol sat above them all upon his carved obsidian throne, broad-shouldered, motionless, his dark ceremonial armor drinking the torchlight. He was the kind of man songs were written about in fearful voices. The king who broke rival alphas with his bare hands. The ruler whose wolf was said to be so dominant that lesser wolves whimpered in his presence. The male every noble family wanted to bind through marriage, and every enemy prayed never to face in battle. But now his golden gaze was fixed on Lyra, as if she were the only thing in the room, not with mockery, not with pity. With recognition so unsettling, it made her skin crawl. "I can't," she whispered. The elder councilman to the king's right gave a brittle laugh. At last, she speaks the truth. Murmurs spread. Someone behind the front ranks said, "Of course she can't. She's nothing." Another voice followed. "Then let the king finish what the gods forgot to do at birth." Laughter rose in little sharp bursts. Lyra kept her eyes lowered, because if she looked at them, if she looked at the faces that had scorned her since childhood, she was afraid the old pain would split her apart before the moon ever could. Yet Chaol did not look away. "You can," he said, quieter this time, and somehow more dangerous. "You have been doing it all your life, only not in the way you understand." A crack of silver light raced beneath Lyra's skin and vanished so quickly she almost thought she imagined it. The court did not see it, but the king did. His jaw tightened, and in that suspended, impossible moment, before Lyra's secret tore the kingdom open, the story of how a mocked servant became the most feared bloodline in the realm began long before the court, long before the king, long before she ever heard the word Moonborn. It began in ash, cold, and hunger. Blackthorn Keep had never been kind to the weak. The castle rose from a spine of dark mountains, its towers black against the sky, its banners marked with the silver wolf crest of the Draven line. Every child born under those towers learned the same lesson early. Strength was survival. Weakness was an invitation to be devoured. Wolf pups were celebrated the moment they first shifted. Young males were tested in blood ring combat before they were old enough to shave. Females with strong wolves were courted, traded, married, and elevated, according to the usefulness of their blood. But Lyra had been born without a shift, without claws, without golden eyes, without anything the kingdom respected. By 5, the other children had started calling her Ghost Girl because she moved too quietly and never fought back. By 7, they called her broken. By 10, most simply called her wolfless, as if it were not a condition but a crime. She belonged to no great house. Her mother had died birthing her, and her father, a stable hand with more drink than dignity in him, disappeared into the mountain passes when she was 8 and never returned. Some said bandits got him. Some said winter did. Some said he ran because no male could bear being remembered as the father of a wolfless girl. None of it mattered. Blackthorn Keep had swallowed her whole after that, and the lower servants' quarters became the only home she knew. She scrubbed stone floors until her fingers cracked. She carried water, hauled wood, washed blood from training uniforms, and learned early which guards kicked, which cooks stole, which noblewomen needed only one wrong glance to make a servant's day miserable. There was no gentleness in that life. Even pity was dangerous because it marked you as weak by association. Only one person had ever shown her kindness in those years. Old Mara, the castle laundress, a bent-backed widow with a scar down one cheek and a tongue sharp enough to flay a careless man. Mara never called Lyra wolfless, never broken. She simply called her girl, in the rough, practical way one might speak to a storm lantern. Something fragile, perhaps, but useful if handled right. "Listen to me," Mara had once muttered while wringing out a blood-stained tunic. "The castle will teach you to bow until your spine forgets it was ever straight. Don't let it. There are creatures that survive because they bare their teeth, and creatures that survive because they are underestimated until it is too late. Figure out which one you are." At the time, Lyra thought Mara was only trying to give her courage. She did not know those words would one day feel like prophecy. Survival in Blackthorn depended on invisibility, and Lyra grew skilled at it. She learned to walk with lowered eyes and silent feet. She learned which corridors the nobles used and which passageways servants preferred. She learned how to leave a room before the mocking started, how to hide scraps of bread for later, how to mask fear until it hardened into something quieter and colder. But invisibility was never complete. There were always moments when the kingdom remembered she existed and punished her for it. The worst came during public ceremonies, where weakness became spectacle, and no ceremony was crueler than the moonrite. The moonrite took place on the first full moon after winter broke. It was a sacred festival in Blackthorn, half devotion and half display. Young wolves who had come of age presented themselves before the moon altar. Noble families paraded daughters in silk and silver to attract alliances. Warriors competed in ritual combat, and at the center of it all, under the moon's pale judgment, stood the Alpha King to bless the season and remind everyone who ruled. Lyra hated moonrite with a private, desperate intensity because it gathered every cruelty the kingdom possessed into one glittering, merciless night. This year the keep glowed with torch fire, silver ribbons, wolf skull lanterns, and the scent of spiced meat drifting from the lower courtyards. Servants rushed like shadows through polished corridors, carrying trays, wine, velvet cloaks, ceremonial blades. Lyra kept to the edges, head down, balancing a tray of goblets meant for the nobles' gallery. She might have survived the evening unnoticed if Lady Seraphine had not seen her. Seraphine Vey was the daughter of one of the richest noble houses in the kingdom, and she carried beauty the way other women carried weapons. Her hair was pale as frost, her smile always too precise, her voice soft enough to make one lean closer before the cruelty landed. She had set her sights on King Kale months ago, and though the king had shown no public preference for any female, Seraphine moved through the court, as if the throne were already half hers. She despised Lyra, for reasons Lyra did not fully understand. Perhaps because cruelty sought easy targets. Perhaps because Kale's gaze had once paused a fraction too long on the servant girl crossing a courtyard. Perhaps because powerful women sometimes hated most the females who possessed something they themselves could not name. "You there," Seraphine called, lifting one jeweled hand. Lyra stopped. Nobles nearby turned, sensing amusement. "Come closer." Lyra obeyed because servants always obeyed. Seraphine's eyes drifted over her plain brown dress, the tray in her hands, the loose braid slipping over one shoulder. "What a perfect little reminder of why blood matters," Seraphine said sweetly to the group around her. Several nobles laughed. "Tell me, girl, when the moon rises tonight, what will you offer it? Since it denied you a wolf to begin with." More laughter. Lyra stared at the tray. "I have work to do, my lady, and now you have different work." Seraphine plucked a silver ribbon from one of the ceremonial tables, and with two attendants at her side, pulled Lyra forward, down the stairs, into the edge of the central courtyard, where the moonrite dancers were gathering. "If she cannot shift," Seraphine announced to those nearby, "perhaps she can at least amuse us by pretending she belongs among wolves." Someone tied the silver ribbon around Lyra's wrist, as though marking livestock. A circle formed almost instantly. Nobles, guards, servants slowing to watch, Lyra's face burned. This was how humiliation worked in Blackthorn, not as a single blow, but as a crowd leaning in together. The moon, just clearing the high walls, poured pale light over the courtyard stones. Drums sounded. The ritual wolves, 3 massive gray beasts kept for ceremony, were led past the ring. Normally they snarled at any unranked servant who came too close. Tonight, as Lyra stood frozen in the center, with laughter needling her from every side, the lead wolf stopped, its yellow eyes fixed on her. A hush broke across the nearest circle. Instead of baring its teeth, the animal lowered its head. Then the second did the same. Then the third. Silence crashed down. Seraphine's smile vanished for one heartbeat before she recovered. "A trick," she said sharply. "Move them." But the handlers tugged uselessly. All 3 wolves remained bowed before Lyra, their bodies trembling. Lyra had no idea why. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. The crowd murmured, confusion moving through it like wind through dead leaves. And on the raised balcony above the courtyard, where the royal family and council had just arrived to observe the ceremony, the Alpha King stopped walking. Chaol Draven did not believe in accidents. He especially did not believe in ritual wolves lowering themselves to a servant girl. From the balcony, he studied the scene below while the court shifted around him in restless confusion. The moonlit courtyard made everything sharp, the pale silver ribbon at Lyra's wrist, her exposed fear, Seraphine's tightening mouth, the wolves kneeling in instinctive submission. Chaol felt his own wolf stir beneath his skin, not with aggression, but with a strange, alert intensity. He had noticed the girl before, though he would never have admitted it aloud. In passing, in corridors, in the training yard carrying water buckets far too heavy for her frame. Once in the library wing, where she had knelt, gathering fallen scrolls, and he had caught a scent from her that did not belong to any servant. He had dismissed it then, because kings had no time for curiosities that smelled like moonlight and storms. But now curiosity sharpened into something else. The elder beside him, Lord Varric of the council, hissed in disapproval. This should be ended. Chaol did not answer. He descended the steps slowly, the crowd parting before him at once. Every face lowered. Every voice died. Even Seraphine stepped back. Lyra did not raise her eyes until his boots stopped before her. When she did, Chaol saw what the others always missed. Not just fear, but endurance. The kind that had been tested too many times and had somehow not yet broken. "What did you do?" he asked. Her lips parted. "Nothing, my king. No lie scent, no stutter of falsehood in her pulse." He turned to the handlers. "Release the wolves." They let go at once. The beasts did not move. Chaol stepped closer to Lyra. The scent came stronger now. Cold night, silver rain, and beneath it, something ancient enough to prick instinct like a blade. Not wolfless, impossible, hidden. His gaze slid to the ribbon at her wrist. With one motion he tore it free. The moment it left her skin, the wolves whined and lowered themselves further, bellies close to the stone. Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Seraphine's face went pale. Chaol did not show his thoughts. "This servant now belongs to the inner keep staff," he said, voice carrying across the entire courtyard. "Any insult directed at her will be treated as insult to the crown." Shocked silence met the decree. Lyra stared, as if she had misheard. Seraphine's nails dug into her palms. Lord Varric's expression darkened. Chaol looked at Lyra one last moment. "Report to the Eastern Chamber wing at dawn." Then he turned and left, though every instinct in him remained half-tethered to the girl standing in the moonlight while the wolves knelt at her feet. From that night onward, Lyra's life changed in ways both terrifying and subtle. The inner keep was not kinder than the lower quarters, merely quieter in its cruelty. The servants there spoke in whispers and watched with narrowed eyes. The guards no longer shoved her aside, but their restraint felt less like respect and more like waiting. And above all else, she lived under the awareness that the king had noticed her. In Blackthorn, being seen by Chaol Draven could save you or ruin you, sometimes in the same breath. Her new duties placed her along the eastern residential wing, tending fires, carrying correspondence, setting wine in the king's private council room, cleaning the war gallery after strategic meetings. She learned the rhythm of the upper halls quickly. Chaol rose before dawn, trained in the lower ring with his captain, met with scouts by first light, with council by noon, and spent long hours in the war room when border tensions grew. He was not soft with anyone. He rarely raised his voice, because he did not need to. He carried command, the way other men carried their own skin. Yet with Lyra, something was different. He asked questions. Not many, not often, but enough to unsettle her. How long have you worked in the keep? Do you sleep well in the eastern wing? Have you always been unaffected by dominant scent? Do wolves often behave strangely around you? She answered carefully, truth wrapped in ignorance, because she did not know enough to lie well. And the more he asked, the more frightened she became, not of punishment, but of discovery, because there were things Lyra had hidden, even from herself. The first strange thing she remembered had happened when she was 9. A feral mountain wolf had wandered into the servant yard during a winter storm, gaunt and frantic with hunger. The adults shouted. Children ran, and Lyra had frozen where she stood, a bucket slipping from numb fingers. The wolf had turned toward her, eyes wild. Then, halfway through its charge, it stopped, its ears flattened. It circled her once, whining low in its throat, and backed away into the snow. Mara had slapped Lyra hard afterward and dragged her inside, not in anger, but in terror. "Never speak of that," she had hissed. "If anyone asks, it went for the goats." Later, there had been other things. Dreams of silver woods and a crown floating above black water. Moments when moonlight made her skin hum. A time at 13 when boys from the training yard cornered her near the stables and one reached for her arm, only for every horse in the stable to rear at once, as if a predator had entered. She had learned not to question too loudly what the kingdom would fear too quickly. But now the king's attention pressed against those old memories, making them dangerous again. One night, weeks after the moonrite, Lyra entered the war gallery with fresh oil lamps and found Chaol alone before a vast map carved into the wall. The chamber was lit only by braziers and moonlight from narrow windows, turning the king into a darker shape among shadows. He did not look at her as she crossed to the lampstands. "Do you know why wolves form packs?" he asked. The question startled her enough that she nearly spilled oil. "Because they need one another to hunt?" she answered cautiously. "That is what children are taught." He finally turned. "But no, wolves form packs because instinct recognizes order, power, blood. They know when something higher stands among them." Lyra's pulse quickened. "Why are you telling me this?" Chaol stepped closer. "Because my warhounds refuse to bare their teeth at you. Because the ceremonial wolves bowed to you. Because yesterday, when Captain Theron returned from the border with 3 captured rogues, every one of them stared at you like they knew your scent." His gaze sharpened. "Who are you, Lyra?" She had no answer that could satisfy him. No answer that would keep her safe. "I'm no one," she said. Something flashed in his face then. Not anger exactly, but frustration edged with something almost personal. "That," he said, voice lowering, "is the one thing I no longer believe." The words settled between them like a drawn blade. Lyra finished lighting the final lamp and turned to leave. But as she passed him, a wave of dizziness struck so hard her vision went white. She stumbled. Chaol caught her before she hit the stone. His hand closed around her wrist, and the room exploded into silver. For one impossible heartbeat, Lyra saw another place layered over the chamber. Not the war gallery, but an ancient moonlit forest. White wolves kneeling in rows. A throne of silver roots. A woman crowned in crescent light, standing with her hand over the head of a massive celestial wolf whose eyes looked exactly like Lyra's. Then, the vision vanished. Lyra gasped and pulled away, but Chaol's face had changed. He had seen something too. "What was that?" he demanded. She shook her head, terrified. "I don't know." But he had felt the shock in her body, heard the honesty in her fear. Chaol released her slowly. "Go." She fled before he could ask more, but his scent followed her into the corridor, dark pine, smoke, iron, and the dangerous certainty of a king who had just glimpsed proof that the world was not what he thought it was. That night, Lyra dreamed more vividly than ever before. She stood barefoot in silver grass under an enormous moon. A river of black glass wound through the forest. Voices whispered from everywhere and nowhere, female and ancient, each one saying the same phrase in a language she somehow understood without learning. "Return, little crown. Return." Then the grass moved. A wolf emerged, larger than any creature that should exist, its fur white threaded with shifting silver light, as though moonbeams themselves had grown a body. It approached without menace. When it lowered its head, Lyra saw a crescent-shaped mark burning between its eyes. She looked down at her own wrist and found the same mark glowing under her skin. The wolf's eyes lifted to hers. Not animal eyes. A mind was there. A memory, older than her own. When it spoke, the voice was not sound, but certainty. "You have slept too long." Lyra woke with a cry, the crescent still burning faintly on her wrist before fading into nothing. She wrapped her arm in cloth by instinct, though no one had seen. Somewhere else in the castle, Chaol Draven stood awake at his chamber window, staring at the moon with the same mark ghosting across his palm where he had touched her. The days that followed only deepened the mystery. The king began assigning Lyra tasks that kept her near, but never openly at his side. Delivering sealed notes to the training yard, bringing records to the old library tower, tending fires in the private strategy chamber. It should have felt like surveillance, and perhaps it was. Yet threaded through his scrutiny was protection. When a kitchen overseer tried to strike Lyra for moving too slowly, Captain Theron appeared and quietly removed the man from duty. When two drunken guards cornered her in an archway, a royal decree appeared the next morning, reassigning both to the northern mines. No one told her Chaol ordered it. No one had to, but protection from the king came with danger of its own. Seraphine noticed. So did the council. Lord Varric had served 3 generations of the Draven line and had come to love order more than justice. He trusted blood, lineage, and tradition only when they moved through structures he could control. A servant girl attracting the king's suspicion, and worse, his protection threatened every balance he had spent decades preserving. Varric began asking questions in quiet corridors. Where had the girl been born? Who had her parents served? Was it true wolves bent around her? Had anyone seen marks, visions, unnatural weather? Seraphine, with her own motives sharpened by jealousy, became his eager ally. Together they began digging through old records the way crows peck at carrion, searching not for truth but for something they could use. Lyra sensed the pressure without knowing its shape. She also sensed something changing between herself and Chaol, and that frightened her more than the whispers did. He was still guarded, still stern, still more likely to command than comfort. Yet their conversations lengthened. Once, during a storm that trapped much of the household indoors, she found him in the library tower, staring at a shelf of old prophecy texts. "Do you read?" he asked when she entered with fresh coals for the brazier. "A little," she admitted. He handed her a worn volume. "Read this line." Her eyes moved over ancient script. "When the false moon bleeds, the crown beneath ash shall rise, and the wolves of earth shall bow to the wolf of sky." She frowned. "It sounds like one of Mara's terrible old stories." Chaol watched her too closely. "Do you know what it means?" "No, neither do the scholars. That is what makes prophecy useful. Everyone sees what they want." Lyra closed the book gently. "And what do you see, my king?" A shadow crossed his face. "A kingdom that will tear itself apart to avoid kneeling to the wrong blood." She should have lowered her eyes then. Left. Instead, she asked, "Do kings ever get tired of being feared?" The question hung in the library like a forbidden thing. Chaol's mouth almost curved, not quite a smile. "Fear is cleaner than trust." Cleaner, maybe, but colder. For a second, something vulnerable passed between them, so brief. Lyra wondered if she invented it. Then footsteps sounded in the stairwell and the moment vanished. Not long after, the border attacks began. Rogues from the eastern ravines, hardened wolves loyal to a rival alpha named Dren Veros, started striking caravans and scouting posts. Kael rode out twice in a single week, returning bloodied and exhausted but unbowed. The castle bristled with war readiness. Lyra tried to keep invisible again, but the inner keep no longer allowed it. One evening, Captain Theron sent her to the herb gardens beyond the eastern wall for medicinal roots needed by the healers. She went at dusk, wrapped in a servant cloak, hoping to return before full dark. Instead, she found the garden torn open by claw marks and one of the wall sentries dead beside the rosemary hedge. The smell hit first. Blood, wet fur, hostile male scent. Rogues. She turned to run, but a massive black wolf emerged from the yew shadows, lips peeled back, eyes bright with hunger and recognition. Another circled from the left, then a third. Dren's scouts. Lyra backed toward the stone well, pulse hammering. "Please," she whispered, though she knew wolves did not spare prey because it begged. The lead wolf lunged, and the world split. Moonlight surged through Lyra like a blade drawn from her spine. It did not feel like strength entering her. It felt like something ancient inside her, finally losing patience with her fear. She threw up one hand on instinct. A burst of silver force exploded outward. The wolf flew backward as if struck by a giant fist, crashing through the herb beds. The other two skidded to a halt, whining. Lyra stared at her own glowing hand in horror. The moon overhead burned brighter, too bright, and the crescent mark flared at her wrist, visible now like molten silver. The lead rogue staggered up, not charging again but lowering itself, trembling exactly as the ritual wolves had. The others followed. Lyra's breath came ragged. She did not understand what she had done. She only knew the power had answered before thought, before permission. Then, a deeper snarl split the garden. Kael, half-shifted and monstrous with battle fury, vaulted the wall in a spray of stone. He had returned earlier than expected, and followed the rogue's scent straight to the garden. One look at the kneeling wolves, the shattered earth, and Lyra glowing silver beside the well told him enough to change everything. He tore through the rogues in a blur of claws and blood. One escaped. Two died. When it was over, Kael stood panting, human again only from the waist up, blood streaking his chest and arms, golden eyes blazing as he turned toward Lyra. She expected accusation, fear, perhaps even execution. Instead, he looked not at the dead wolves but at the mark on her wrist. "Come with me," he said, voice hoarse. Now. He took her to a sealed chamber beneath the old chapel, a forgotten place of stone arches and moon symbols worn nearly smooth by time. Only there, behind iron doors and old wards, did he finally let her speak. "I didn't mean to hurt them," Lyra said first, "because guilt arrived before sense. They would have killed you." "I know." Her hands shook. "I don't know what's happening to me." Kael reached toward the nearest wall torch and turned it until hidden compartments opened in the stone. Ancient scroll cases lined the recess within. "The Council believes our kingdom began with the Draven line. They are wrong. Before Blackthorn, before the current Pax, there was another bloodline." He removed one scroll and laid it on the altar stone between them. The drawing upon it made Lyra go still. A silver wolf crowned by a crescent moon, standing over kneeling Pax. "Moonborn," Kael said. "The first alphas according to the old texts. Not rulers by conquest, but by instinct. Wolves did not obey them from fear. They obeyed because the blood itself was higher." Lyra looked from the scroll to him. "Those are myths." "I thought so too." His jaw tightened. "Until you." Her throat closed. Then, "What am I?" Kael was silent a long time. Possibly the reason half this kingdom would kill to keep power where it is. He should have sounded afraid. Instead, there was a dangerous steadiness in him now, a king who had found the shape of a storm and decided to stand closer. "There is more," he admitted. "An old prophecy. The council hid parts of it. My father made me swear never to speak it unless the signs appeared." Lyra's eyes searched his. "And have they?" He stepped closer. "You tell me. Wolves kneel. Moon marks appear. Silver force obeys your fear. And when I touch you..." He stopped there. But she knew, because she had felt it too, the strange pull. Not soft, not gentle, but undeniable. Not just attraction. recognition. A cursed bond, perhaps, or something older than mating itself. The chamber seemed suddenly too small for breathing. "Why protect me?" she asked. Kyle's answer came before he could stop it. "Because when the world looks at you, it sees a threat to power. When I look at you, I see someone who was forced to survive a kingdom that did not deserve her." The words hit harder than praise ever could have, because they were not flattery. They were truth spoken by a man who rarely offered any. Lyra had no defense against that. Neither, perhaps, did he. Their closeness should have changed everything. Instead, it changed nothing and everything at once. Outwardly, Kale remained king, and Lyra remained servant. In private, the space between them grew charged. He began training her in secret in the lower chapel chamber, not as one trains a warrior, but as one teaches someone to stop fearing her own body. "Power answers emotion first," he told her. "If fear commands you, fear commands it." She hated those lessons because every attempt to call the Silver Force brought fragments of visions with it. Trees of light, wolves of starlit bone, a woman's scream, a crown falling into fire. Yet she also craved them because with Kale there, steady and watchful, she felt less alone inside the mystery of herself. Once, when frustration made her hands shake and moonlight crack through the altar stones, he caught both her wrists and grounded her with a single command. "Look at me." She did. The power stilled. His grip tightened. "There," he murmured. Again, neither of them spoke of the intimacy in that moment. The way his thumb brushed the racing pulse at her wrist. The way her breath stumbled, because his face had never been so close. Kings were not meant to touch servant girls like that. Wolfless girls were not meant to calm their power to the sound of a king's voice. But rules had already begun breaking long before either admitted it. The first kiss nearly happened in the chapel crypt after midnight, with rain hammering the stone above them and silver light trembling in Lyra's palms. She had just managed, for the first time, to summon the outline of a wolf's head made of moonlight before it dissolved. Breathless, laughing from sheer disbelief, she turned to Kale. He was already looking at her not as a subject, not as a mystery, but as a man looks when restraint becomes dangerous. He lifted one hand to her cheek. "You are extraordinary," he said, almost angrily, as though resenting the fact. Lyra's heart climbed into her throat. "Then why do you always sound like that frightens you?" A shadow moved through his eyes. "Because extraordinary things change kingdoms." His hand remained on her face. Her fingers curled around his wrist. The distance between them thinned to almost nothing. Then the chapel bell rang overhead, 3 hard strikes, an alarm from the eastern gate. Kale stepped back at once, the king returning like armor over flesh. "Stay here." He was gone before she could answer, leaving behind the scent of rain and a pulse of longing Lyra had no right to feel. By dawn, the castle knew a border messenger had been murdered, and signs of internal betrayal had been found near the gate. The council called emergency session. Seraphine moved through the halls like silk over knives. Lord Varric began restricting access to old records. Captain Theron doubled guards on the eastern wing. Something was closing around Lyra, though the exact shape remained hidden. She found Mara in the laundry vault that afternoon, hands deep in steaming water, face more drawn than usual. "You should leave," Mara said without greeting. Lyra stared. "Leave where?" "Anywhere the castle walls can't hear you breathe." "Why?" Mara looked around to ensure they were alone. "Because I heard Seraphine speaking with Varric. They found something in the old birth rolls. A woman named Alara Vale, marked dead after childbirth. But the margins were altered, and one seal on the record was royal." Lyra's blood turned cold. Her mother's name. Why would my mother have a royal seal? Mara's eyes glittered with old fear. "Because, girl, I think someone buried the truth of your birth, and powerful people do not bury truth unless they mean to kill what grows from it." Before Lyra could respond, footsteps sounded beyond the door. Mara shoved a basket into her hands and hissed, "Go, now." Lyra obeyed, but the world no longer felt solid beneath her feet. The next revelation came from the least expected source. That evening, while carrying council wine to the upper chamber, Lyra passed a half-open side room and heard Seraphine's voice inside. She should have kept walking. Instead, one sentence froze her in place. "If the king will not choose me willingly, then we make the servant his disgrace." Lyra pressed to the stone just beyond the doorway. Through the narrow opening, she saw Seraphine with Lord Varric and a hooded man she recognized only after a second her father. Alive. Drunk, gaunt, but alive. Shock nearly betrayed her. "Are you certain?" Varric asked. The man swallowed from a flask with shaking fingers. "Her mother made me swear never to tell," he muttered. "Said the child would die if anyone knew. But I've had nothing for years, and your lady offered silver." Seraphine's smile did not reach her eyes. "Then tell the council again." Her father wiped his mouth. Ilara wasn't some servant whore. She came to the lower quarter bleeding and half delirious with a newborn. Carried a signet she hid in cloth. Said wolves were hunting her. Said if the baby ever showed silver under moonlight, she must never be brought before a king. Varric leaned forward. "Did she say who the father was?" "No, only that the child belonged to a line the council destroyed." Silence. Then Seraphine said softly, "Good. At dawn we accuse the girl of sorcery and treason. By midday, the king will be forced to expose whatever she is in front of the whole court, and if she proves monstrous, he will have to kill her himself." Lyra stumbled back from the door, one hand over her mouth. Her father sold her for silver. The council intended public exposure, and KLKL might already know more than he had told her. Her first instinct was to run to him. Her second was darker. What if he had allowed this? What if kings protected only until politics demanded otherwise? The uncertainty hurt more than betrayal should have. Before she could decide, a hand clamped around her arm and yanked her into darkness. It was Captain Theron. He dragged her into an unused stairwell, shut the door, and released her. "They know," he said grimly. "The council has summoned full court at sunrise." Lyra's voice came thin. "Did the king approve it?" Theron hesitated just long enough to wound. He argued against public proceedings. Varric invoked ancient law. Lyra laughed once, a broken little sound. "So yes. Listen to me." Theron stepped closer. "His Majesty is trying to protect you. By putting me in front of the people who want me dead? By buying time. If he openly defies the council without proof, they will call it corruption of rank and move the packs against him." Lyra shook her head, tears stinging harder because she despised them. "I trusted him." Theron's expression softened a fraction. "Then trust him one more night." He pressed a small dagger into her palm. "If they separate you from the king tomorrow, do not let Seraphine touch your wrists. Whatever else happens, remember that." He left before she could ask why, but trust was harder in the hours before dawn than in any speech spoken safely by daylight. Lyra did not sleep. She sat in her narrow chamber staring at the dagger and listening to the castle breathe around her. At some point the door opened, and Kale entered without escort, without armor, wearing only a dark shirt and the exhaustion of a man who had been fighting battles on too many fronts. Lyra rose at once, anger and relief colliding so violently that she could barely speak. "Did you know?" she demanded. "About my mother, about the council. Not all of it." His voice was rough. "Enough. Enough to let them drag me into court." His face hardened. "You think I want that? I think you're king," she said, and that was accusation enough. Silence stretched. Then Kale stepped toward her. "When my father died, the council swore loyalty with one hand and sharpened chains with the other. I've spent years keeping them from turning this kingdom into a nest of noble factions. If I strike too soon, they unite against me. If I do nothing, they destroy you. So yes, I let the hearing stand, because it is the only place I can legally put my body between yours and theirs." Lyra's anger wavered under the raw honesty of that. "And if what they force out of me is worse than they fear," he looked at her a long time, "then they will have to go through me first." Her throat tightened. "Kale." It was the first time she had spoken his name without title. Something changed in his eyes. He crossed the final distance and took her face in both hands. "There is one thing I withheld," he said quietly. "The prophecy does not say the Moonborn will merely return. It says the reigning king will either kneel to the Moonborn Alpha or die opposing her. I did not tell you because I did not want destiny deciding what I chose. Lyra stared. And what do you choose? His forehead touched hers. You. The word broke whatever restraint remained. He kissed her then, not soft at first, but hungry, almost furious, like a man who had denied himself too long and knew the world might take this from him by morning. Lyra kissed him back with equal desperation because every wound of the day, every year of loneliness, every dangerous unknown collapsed into the certainty of his hands around her, and the truth that neither crown nor fear had managed to keep them apart. When he finally pulled back, both were breathing hard. When they call for your fear tomorrow, Chaol murmured, do not give it to them. He pressed his lips once to the glowing place on her wrist. Give them the moon. Dawn came like a blade. The great hall filled before the sun cleared the eastern cliffs. Nobles in ceremonial black lined the tiers. Guards stood in double ranks. The council took their carved seats beneath the wolf banners. At the center, a circle of moonstone had been laid into the floor. Old law, old magic, the place where accused traitors were tested before crown and pax. Lyra was brought in chains. Seraphine watched from the front gallery, in silver silk, looking beautiful enough to be mistaken for virtue by any fool. Lyra searched only for Chaol. She found him on the throne, dressed for judgment in black armor chased with silver, expression unreadable. If not for the mark of strain at the corner of his mouth, she might have believed the night between them had been a dream. Lord Varric rose. Lyra Vale, he declared, voice carrying. You stand accused of consorting with forbidden power, concealing treasonous blood, and bewitching the crown itself. Murmurs rolled through the hall. Varric lifted one brittle hand. Witnesses have testified to unnatural wolf behavior, silver manifestations, and concealed lineage. By ancient law, the accused may prove innocence by blood and shift. If no wolf answers, she dies as a liar. If dark magic answers, she dies as an abomination. If something else answers, his gaze slid to Chaol. Then the kingdom shall see and judge. Lyra's wrists burned where moonsteel touched skin. Seraphine descended from the gallery holding a ceremonial blade. As plaintiff for House Vey, she said sweetly, I request first blood. Theron's warning flashed through Lyra's mind. Do not let Seraphine touch your wrists. Seraphine approached with the blade, and beneath the silk at her sleeve Lyra caught the scent of bitter herbs, binding poisons used in old magic rites. Not a mere cut then, a trap. Lyra twisted just as Seraphine reached for her. The blade sliced Lyra's forearm instead of her wrist. Silver light flared from the wound. Gasps erupted. Seraphine stumbled back in shock. The moonstone circle lit beneath Lyra's feet. Chaol rose from the throne in one violent motion. Enough. But Varric shouted over him. By the law invoked, the test proceeds. My king command her. Every eye swung to Chaol. This was the moment power and politics had engineered toward. He could refuse and fracture the realm. Or obey and risk unleashing something none of them could control. Lyra looked at him across the hall. Whatever happened now would end the life she had known. Chaol descended the steps like a dark storm. He stopped before her, close enough that only she could hear his final words. Remember. Then he turned so the whole kingdom could witness his face, his authority, his command. Shift. The world held its breath. Lyra felt the moon through stone, through walls, through flesh. She felt every cruelty ever given to her, the laughter, the names, the hands that shoved, the voices that said nothing, the years spent folding herself smaller so others could feel taller. She felt the betrayal of blood, the terror of discovery, the savage tenderness of Chaol's mouth the night before. She felt the kingdom demanding proof. Then something inside her answered with ancient contempt. Light split her skin. Not red, not gold, silver. It raced up her arms, across her throat, through her eyes until the hall vanished into pure moonfire. The chains shattered. Wind slammed outward, though no doors had opened. Nobles screamed. The banners snapped, as if caught in a storm. Lyra did not fall into the shift the way wolves did. She rose into it. Bone sang instead of broke. Power unfolded. A spectral wolf, vast and celestial, surged up behind her like a second self made of night sky and moonlight. The crescent mark blazed across her brow. When her scream tore free, it became a howl that was not one voice, but 1,000 layered through time. Every wolf in the hall dropped. Guards hit their knees. Nobles collapsed in instinctive submission. Even the council members clutched their seats with white hands, their inner wolves recoiling in primal recognition. Seraphine crawled backward, face stripped of beauty into terror. Lord Varric whispered, horrified. Moonborn. Lyra stood in the center of the burning silver circle, no longer small, no longer hidden. Her dress had transformed into flowing pale armor threaded with lunar light. Her hair moved as if underwater. And her eyes. Her eyes belonged to no servant girl. They belonged to the First Crown, the oldest command. The lost line the kingdom had tried to erase. A line born not from pack law, but from the moon itself. Chaos erupted immediately after awe. Some screamed blasphemy. Others cried, prophecy fulfilled. Several guards fled. One of the elder councilmen reached for a hidden blade, and Kyle tore his throat out before the man could draw it fully. The hall went dead silent at the violence. Blood dripped from Kale's hand onto the black stone while he turned not toward the court, but toward Lyra. For one terrifying second, she did not know what he would do. Fear cut through the silver tide. If he attacked, if he rejected what she was, she did not know whether she could stop herself from answering with ruin. Around them, all wolves remained bowed by instinct, all except Kael. He alone stood, not because he was untouched, but because he was fighting every ancient law written into his blood. His wolf raged, not against her, but toward her, torn between kingly pride and something deeper. The prophecy rose between them like a blade. Kneel or die opposing her. The entire kingdom watched. Seraphine, still on the floor, breathed in desperate hope. Varric looked half-mad with calculation. And then Caldraven, Alpha King of Blackthorn, lowered himself to one knee before the girl they had mocked. "My queen," he said, voice carrying to the highest stone arch. The hall shattered into collective shock. Lyra's breath caught harder than during the shift itself. This was the emotional reversal none of them had imagined. The feared ruler of the realm choosing her not out of coercion, not because instinct broke him, but because his eyes, when they lifted to hers, were clear, deliberate, chosen, a protector's oath wrapped in submission. "Rise," Lyra whispered before thinking. Kale did. The silver pressure in the room eased slightly, enough for some wolves to breathe again. But chaos had only changed shape, not ended. From the rear of the hall came a roar of defiance. Drenvaros, rival alpha of the eastern ravines, burst through the broken council doors with a band of warwolves at his back. He had timed his assault to court instability, expecting noble fracture and weakness. Instead, he found prophecy made flesh. For one heartbeat, even Dren faltered before Lyra's unveiled power. Then ambition overcame instinct. "The Draven line has gone mad," he shouted. "You would bow to a witch? To a creature buried by your ancestors?" Several uncertain nobles lifted their heads, clinging to any argument that might preserve the old world. Dren drew his war axe. "Kill her now, and the packs remain free." Kale stepped in front of Lyra at once. "Touch her, and I will feed what remains of you to your own men." Dren laughed, but unease flickered in his eyes. "You speak like a mate, not a king. Then learn the difference," Kyle said, and shifted. His wolf erupted in a storm of black fur and muscle, huge, even by alpha standards, shadow dark with eyes like molten gold. Dren's wolves surged. The hall became battle. Guards loyal to Kael met rogues in a spray of steel and claws. Seraphine screamed for the Veyguards, but half of them were already too shaken by Lyra's presence to move. Varric tried to escape through the side aisle. Theron intercepted him. Lyra stood frozen only one breath, too long before instinct and necessity aligned. The moonborn power flooded through her. Not as blind force now, but as command. She lifted one hand. Every wolf in the hall enemy Ally, Courthound, Rogue stopped as if seized by invisible chains. Gasps followed. Lyra's voice rang with layered authority. Enough. Even Dren's black warbeast shuddered under it. Kale, half poised to tear out Dren's throat, turned his great head toward her. Lyra saw in that glance not submission alone, but pride, trust. She stepped forward through the wreckage of the court. "You wanted to know what I am," she said, voice carrying unnaturally through the hall. "I am the blood you buried. The line your greed called myth because truth threatened your power. I am not your curse. I am your reckoning." Her gaze found Varric cowering behind Theron's drawn sword. "How many children died because the council hunted this bloodline?" Varric said nothing. That silence answered enough. Rage moved through the room, not at Lyra now, but at those who had hidden, manipulated, and sacrificed. She turned to Seraphine next. "You sought a crown. Was it worth this?" Seraphine's mask had fully cracked. "He was supposed to choose strength," she spat, "not pity some gutter-born freak." Lyra might once have been wounded by those words. Now they felt small. Kyle shifted back to human form, blood streaking his shoulders. He walked to Lyra's side and took his place there openly, a public alignment more intimate than any kiss. "Strength," he said coldly to Seraphine, "is knowing when the world's idea of worth is a lie." Then he faced the hall. Lord Varric, Lady Seraphine Vey, and all council members complicit in concealment of royal blood, unlawful persecution, and treason against crown and kingdom are under immediate sentence. No one challenged him. Not now. Not with the Moonborn Alpha at his side, and every wolf in the room still straining instinctively toward her command. Yet the climax had one more blade to turn. Dren, desperate and pride-drunk, broke the stillness by hurling his axe straight at Lyra. The room shouted in warning. Kale moved, but not fast enough. Lyra did not dodge. The silver wolf behind her surged forward, jaws of moonlight snapping around the weapon midair and crushing it into glittering dust. Then the power she had barely controlled moments ago answered fully at last. The celestial wolf leapt across the hall and slammed Dren to the stone. He screamed as silver light pinned him, not shredding flesh, but forcing his wolf into total submission. Lyra crossed to him slowly. "You wanted Pax to remain free," she said. "What you meant was you wanted them kneeling only to fear." Dren snarled until her hand touched his brow. Instantly his rage collapsed into terrified stillness. "Leave Blackthorn," she commanded, the ancient authority in her voice resonating through every beam and bone in the chamber. "Swear never to raise claw against this kingdom again." Under any other ruler he would have spat in defiance. Under the Moonborn command, he bowed his head to the floor. "I swear." Lyra released him. He fled with what remained of his men, not because mercy had softened her, but because victory secured by unquestioned dominance was more powerful than slaughter. The court watched and understood. This was not borrowed magic, not sorcery, not accident. This was rule. What followed in the Great Hall was not immediate celebration. Kingdoms built on cruelty do not transform in a breath merely because truth enters. There was fear, trembling, awe edged with resentment. But there was also something else in the way the wolves looked at Lyra. Now a recognition so instinctive it bypassed politics entirely. Servants wept openly in the back ranks. Some nobles lowered their heads, because even pride could not wholly fight blood memory. Mara, who had forced her way into the gallery during the chaos, pressed a weathered hand to her mouth and cried with fierce old relief. Theron bound Varric in chains. Seraphine was stripped of rank on the spot. And Kale, standing before the assembly beside the woman they had called wolfless trash, did what no ruler before him had dared. He revised the shape of power aloud. "From this day," he declared, "worth in Blackthorn shall no longer be measured only by shift, house, or the cruelty of old blood. Let all hear it, those without wolves are not outside the law of the realm. They stand under crown protection as fully as any pack-born noble. Any who use rank to torment the weak will answer to throne." Murmurs broke again, But this time no one openly opposed him. The sight of Lyra still glowing with moonborn power discouraged much stupidity. Chaol then turned to her publicly, his voice lower but no less clear. "Lyra Vale. If that is still the name you choose, you need not accept any title we offer. You owe this kingdom nothing. But if you would stand with me, not behind me, then Blackthorn will have its first true equal throne, every eye fixed on her." This, perhaps, mattered more than the kneeling had, because the world had seen his instinct. Now it would see his heart. Lyra looked out over the hall that had once been nothing but danger to her. She saw servants who feared hope more than despair, because despair was familiar. She saw wolves shaking beneath the old law that had failed them. She saw Mara, Theron, broken nobles, bound traitors, and at the center of it all, Chaol, who had chosen her before the kingdom allowed him to, standing with his future open and unguarded for the first time. "I will stand," she said. Then, after one beat that transformed the chamber completely, "With you." The hall exhaled. The days after the revelation were not easy, but they were real. Blackthorn Keep had to be remade stone by stone, law by law, trust by wounded trust. The council dissolved. Varric confessed enough, under formal trial, to reveal the breadth of the old purges. The Moonborn line had been nearly exterminated, generations earlier by noble houses, terrified of surrendering power to instinctive sovereignty. Lyra's mother, Ilara, had been one of the last surviving descendants, hidden, hunted, pregnant when she fled. Chaol found the truth among sealed archives and brought every page to Lyra himself, not as king presenting evidence, but as a man carrying back pieces of a life stolen from her. They read the records together in the library tower, late into the night, sometimes in silence, sometimes in shared grief sharp enough to make breath painful. "She loved you," Chaol said once, after Lyra read a fragment of Ilara's final letter. Lyra pressed trembling fingers to the ink and nodded, because words failed. Chaol wrapped an arm around her shoulders and let grief come, without trying to conquer it. That, more than power, began teaching her what safety might feel like. Their relationship, once forced into shadow by rank and danger, no longer had to hide. But love did not arrive in simple softness. It came in fierce, hard-won forms suited to the people they were. Chaol still woke half the nights, reaching for a dagger, because Rule had taught him to expect betrayal before dawn. Lyra still flinched at laughter behind her, some old wounds too deep to vanish just because a crown had changed hands. Yet they learned one another deliberately. He discovered she liked the western battlements at sunset, because the wind there cleared her thoughts. She discovered he hated formal banquets, but endured them with ruthless patience, because chaos in public became blood in private. He taught her statecraft, border strategy, and how to hear lies beneath polished court language. She taught him where his anger turned blinding, where mercy strengthened authority more than fear, where the people below the nobility had been suffering unnoticed. They argued, they desired, they challenged, they chose, again and again. The bond between them deepened in ways both mystical and human. Old texts suggested the Moonborn Alpha could form not a mating bond in the ordinary sense, but a sovereign bond, one that linked chosen equal to chosen equal, making each stronger where the other would have stood alone. Lyra feared that such a bond would trap Chaol, that prophecy might once again masquerade as choice. So on the night the old moon altar was restored beneath the chapel, she asked him plainly, "If the prophecy had said you must destroy me, would you have?" Chaol looked at her across the silver-lit altar and answered without hesitation, "Then I would have burned the prophecy." Something inside her, some last remnant of the girl who expected abandonment, finally unclenched. When they joined hands over the altar, moonlight rose around them, not violent this time, but warm and immense. No audience watched, no council judged, no kingdom demanded spectacle. It was only them and the sacred quiet. The silver mark on Lyra's wrist met the answering mark on Chaol's palm. Light threaded upward, wrapping their joined hands, their arms, their throats like blessing instead of chain. He kissed her there under the moon with reverence that somehow felt even more intimate than hunger. She kissed him back with all the dark tenderness she had once thought the world would never allow her to keep. Outside, wolves across the mountain range howled together, not in alarm, but in recognition of a bond freely made. As seasons turned, the realm began to change around them. Not perfectly, never neatly. Some noble houses resisted reforms, some rival pacts tested the new order. But the people who had lived at the mercy of strength alone began, cautiously, to imagine law might protect rather than prey upon them. Servant children were no longer dragged into courtyards for amusement. Unshifted youths were given positions based on skill, rather than shamed into starvation. Wolfless births stopped being whispered over like funerals. A new council, chosen from packs, villages, and working houses alike, formed under strict oversight. Mara became mistress of household records and terrified lazy scribes into competence. Theron took command of the king's guard and privately admitted to Lyra that the castle had become much less boring since she arrived. Even some nobles changed when survival required adaptation. Fear of the Moonborn brought obedience first. Time, and justice consistently applied, began slowly turning obedience into something more stable. Yet for all the public transformation, the heart of the story remained what it had always been. A girl, the world underestimated, and the man powerful enough to crush her who instead chose to stand beside her. One winter night months later, after the first real peace Blackthorn had known in years, Lyra stood on the highest balcony wrapped in a fur cloak, watching snow drift over the mountains. Below, the keep glowed gold and silver. Kael came up behind her without announcement and settled his hands at her waist. She leaned back into him easily now, the motion natural where once it would have been unthinkable. "What are you thinking?" he asked against her hair. She smiled faintly. "That the last time I stood under a full moon in this keep, I was being mocked in a courtyard. And now?" He turned her gently to face him. Snow touched his dark hair. Moonlight silvered the hard line of his jaw. She let herself look openly, still not fully used to the fact that this fierce, feared king looked at her as though she were something he would protect even from the gods. "Now," she said, "I'm wondering whether the kingdom is finally tired enough to let us have one quiet night." Kael's mouth curved, rare and devastating. "Not likely. Pity. Perhaps the queen should issue an order. Perhaps the king should obey for once." He laughed in a low, warm sound no court had ever truly earned from him, and pulled her closer. "Careful, Moonborn. Power suits you dangerously well." She slid her hands up his chest. "You kneel very well, too." "Only for you." The words might have sounded playful from another man. From Kyle, they were vow. He kissed her under the falling snow, slowly, deeply, with the certainty of someone no longer fighting what destiny had tried to force, because love had surpassed it on its own. Below them, Blackthorn slept under silver light. Above them, the moon watched the kingdom it had nearly lost, and finally found again. And somewhere in the deep memory of wolves, the old story changed. Not into a tale of weakness becoming strength, because Lyra had never truly been weak, into a truer tale of how a kingdom built on dominance met a girl it called nothing, only to discover it had been standing for years in the shadow of the first crown, of how public humiliation became revelation, how fear became allegiance, how a king raised to believe power meant standing above all others, learned that the strongest choice he would ever make was kneeling once, so he could stand forever beside the right one. They had mocked the wolfless girl. They had tried to expose her, bury her, use her, erase her. Instead, under the moon's patient eye, she rose. And when she did, even the Alpha King knew exactly what the whole kingdom had gotten wrong. She was never the girl who had no wolf. She was the one every wolf had been waiting for.